So I'm going to use HubSpot today as my example SaaS application. You can totally use your own application, but I think this is a fun way to experiment with UI changes. So let's actually test out previewing content in HubSpot before we build it. So I'm playing on their services page. You can do this in your application too, but I was looking at their services page and I was imagining if I were HubSpot and I wanted to get people reaching out to my service team more, maybe I want to add a little bit more personalization, add in a photo of someone to try and get people more excited about reaching out. And so the Chrome extension is a great way to preview how content will look on the page once you've installed it. Obviously, I don't have access to HubSpot's code base to install content here, but on your site, you'll be able to install it yourself, but you can still use preview just to take a look at how things will look. I want to add a contact card here to see how that would look. So if I just drag it, whenever it's yellow, it means you can drop. If I drop it here, now we're adding this Claire's little contact card here. I don't know if that's exactly how we want it to look, but we can try building out some content that I think will look a little bit better on this page. So we're done with the preview section, and now we actually get to go into, I think, the most fun part, which is using the Candu editor. As a quick overview of Candu as a whole, when you first log in, you'll come to this dashboard page. This is the thing I was talking about that we keep experimenting with. All of this dashboard is built with Candu. So as we add new things, we can add cards, add text, and this lovely checklist. The next thing we can do is build content. So that's actually where we're going to spend the meat of the rest of the session today. I'm going to skip portals for a second. You can also add user segments, which are really handy if this is the segmentation piece we were talking about. It's just simple if-then logic. So if you're sending Candu data, you can either do that directly in your installation, or you can use a third-party provider like Segment to do that. That data will come through as user properties. You can also use user IDs if you want to target content to a specific person. And then you can just do this really simple if-then logic, add conditions, so you can get really targeted with the user segments that you create. And finally, portals is just a really simple concept of you've created a bunch of content, you've created a bunch of segments. If you want different segments of users to see different pieces of content, portals are where you say content, segment, connection. We actually probably won't jump into that since we're not doing segmentation today, but just so you know if that's something you're interested in doing. We also have this user section. Once you've published content, this will populate with all of the users who are seeing the content that you've published, which is great, especially if you're doing user segmentation to make sure that the right people are seeing the right things. Great, let's build some content. You'll see here that I've created a few different sections to keep myself organized. As you build out more and more content, this can become really helpful. You could just go down to this check plus mark right here anytime you want to add a section. One other thing to note is that we have this templates library. So we've worked with our designers and our customers to create an entire library of best-in-class templates that you can use. I think these are great for a few different reasons. One, if you're not quite sure what to build with Candu, this is a really nice starting point to think through what's possible. Two, if you have an idea of what you want to do, it's possible that we've already built something that kind of looks like it. And it's really helpful to have a starting point if you don't want to start with that scary blank page feeling. So you can actually just open one of these templates, create content, and then replace the imagery and text with whatever makes most sense for your brand. But for the sake of learning the editor, I'm actually going to start us with that scary blank content. So today is May 13th demo. And today I'm going to put that into my live demo content section for my organization. So now we are in the Candu editor. As a quick overview of just to get our bearings, over here on the left, we have what we call the palette. The palette is all of the options of things that you can drag onto the page to create your UI elements. Over here on the right, we have what's called the toolbox. This will change out depending on what element you have selected. So it allows you to do things like margin and padding or set your layouting. And we'll get into this more as we're building content. And then finally, we have what we're calling viewports. And for today, we're building something that goes across a whole page, so it'll be totally fine. But a lot of people will add Candu to a sidebar element on their application, or they'll create an entire dashboard that's wider than this editor. And if you're doing that, it's really helpful to be able to build content in the width of the the space where you're actually going to install Candu. So you can use this viewport to move around, like a dashboard would be 1440 pixels. And you can always go back to auto, which is what we'll do for today. Let's get started with actually building content. So I have this vision of the contact card. I really like the idea of taking this text that we have right here, but adding a person's picture and contact information on the left. So we're going to try and do that today. My first step in doing that will be to actually go in here and grab a container and pull a card onto the page. So I just drag and drop, and that green line tells me where it's going to go. So now I have my base card. And what I want to do in my vision is this picture of a person over here, and then my text and maybe a sign up button on the right. And so I think the best way to do that is actually to add 2 columns to my page quickly. And here's the first time we'll use the toolbox. So here, the card, everything's sort of centered. I want it to take up the entire card when I'm ready. So I'm going to set my card to be a horizontal stretch. So everything goes across the card now. But I think my picture is going to be narrower than this content on the right, which will be my big text box. So over here, I'm going to set this to be 20% of the card and this to be, let's say 70% of the card to leave a little space for padding. And now I have the general layout of the page that I want to publish. Next, I'm going to add my picture. If you want to add the same picture for the fun of it, it's in that content library that's linked in the chat. You can also add a picture of yourself if that's more exciting, or really anything you want here. There's a few different options for adding content or media. If you have something from Google Images or from somewhere you've stored online, you can put in a link. You can also drag anything from your desktop up onto the page and just drop it here to upload. And as soon as you've uploaded any media, we actually save it in our media library. So I'm going to use this stock image right here. That's a little big for what I want on the page. So I'm going to go over here to our toolbox again and change around the width until I think it looks good. So I think that's a little small for me. So we'll go with 200 pixels. You can also move it up and down until it looks like exactly what you want it to. And you can also do % of the page if that's easier for you. So it will expand and contract as the page gets bigger and smaller. The last thing I want to do is that I think I want all of my content center aligned in this layout so that her name goes right underneath her photo. And then the next thing I'll do is add paragraph text. You'll note that this paragraph text looks a little different from, let's say, Candu's branding. I tried to set it up to look a little bit more like HubSpot's, but if you're trying to set the content in here to look exactly like your page, you can actually jump into our style guide. And I'll only spend a second on this, but I really recommend going through and setting all of this up as you're building content because it'll flow through into the editor, it'll flow through into preview, and it'll flow through into your published content. So you can go in and make sure that everything is set up with your fonts. I've changed, normally everything is Open Sans, but I've changed it to Nunito to more closely match HubSpot's fonts. If you have custom branding fonts, you can also upload those here. You don't have to use the Google fonts we provide. And then the other fun thing is you can go in and add all of your brand colors, and those will carry through to things like buttons and badges and other content that you might add to the page. You can also add further customization here. Buttons often have hover effects and other things that make them really custom to your brand. So I recommend just spending 10 to 20 minutes on this, getting it all set up so everything looks really like it fits exactly on your page. I also want to note really quickly, the style guide is universal. So if you're building content for your page, you don't need to constantly be going back and forth and trying to find your brand colors and your hex colors and all of that. You can set it up once and it'll carry through to all of the content that you build for your site. So getting back to content, this is a stock image. So I'm just going to call her Claire Smith and call her a support rock star. All of this text is now left aligning. So if I use the toolbox, I can center everything under her image again. Great. I think this is a little too spaced out, so I'm gonna shrink that up a little bit using this padding. And then the last thing I want to do is actually take this text that I'm excited about, that I think HubSpot did a great job writing, and add it over here to make it pop a little bit. So I just drag in the paragraph text, I'll highlight it and paste the HubSpot text. And then I'm going to add one more thing, which is a button for users to click to get in touch with a support rep. I don't really like that the quote is aligning at the top, so I'm going to move it to center align with the image. Amazingly, in under 10 minutes, we've created an experimental card that we can test out on HubSpot's site. So the last and final thing I want to do is see how it looks in the HubSpot app. So if I were able to replace this, what would it look like? Now, if we open preview, we have this May 13th demo that we just created. I can click it, and just like before, I can move around the page to see where I can put it. I think I'd want to put it right below here. And now you'll see it's loading. Oh, it's pulling in a blue button. If we were to replace this with this new setup that we've created, we could have an image of a person. We could also link her email here potentially, and we'd have our quote in a big card that really pops off the page to encourage people to get in touch. And the nice thing about Candu here is that I like the way this looks. I think it's great. But if I go back to my designers and they want to test out a different button, or if I talk to my product marketing team and they want to test out different language here, we don't need to wait on anyone to change that out. We can just go right back in here, pull out this text, add new text. We can add a heading. We can really play with it as much as we want. And, me as a non-technical person, I'm no longer reliant on my engineering team's sprints to try and get this kind of stuff done. So that's a good quick overview. As promised, I've left some time for Q&A at the end. Have I missed any chats? Oh, it looks like there's some action in the chat. One question, can I use Candu as a web application? Candu is really meant to be added as components to an existing web application. So generally people are using it when they're sort of the non-technical folks on the team and they want to be able to update UI on an existing app. And another thing that's interesting to note is that once you install Candu, it'll be published to your users. So it's not really a prototyping tool, although you can prototype in the editor as much as you want and use preview for that. But it actually is content that gets published to your users and that they can interact with. Are there other questions about how Candu works or other things that people want to take a look at? Before we wrap up, we actually have a few extra minutes here. Oh, great question. Can I have voice content like autoplay MP3 file? We can definitely have video content. That's something that we've been playing around with. And we actually discovered yesterday that you can add live video. So we're going to be experimenting with that. So you could add Twitch or other video content. And that's as simple as pulling a media player over onto the screen. Wouldn't really be relevant in this card's case, but if you wanted to add video directly to the app, you can do that with any linkable video. So YouTube, Vimeo, etc. I think it would need to be linked, but it's possible you might be able to add a strict audio file if that was something you were interested in. Great question. Yeah, and Jonathan's right. You can add Soundcloud as well. So if that's somewhere you're storing audio, that's perfect. And one other note, I linked to our installation documentation today. We can actually open that up really quickly. So traditionally, Candu is added via JavaScript or React to an application, but we actually have a lot of different ways you can install us. And this installation guide doesn't cover everything. Really, any web builder where you can add a JavaScript script is somewhere where you can add Candu content to your page. So we've covered some of the major ones with Webflow and WordPress, but if there's another provider that you're using that you want to add content to, we can work with you to make that happen. Needs to be done in the production site for applying the changes? That's a great question. So Candu, as you can see, obviously, as you're building this content, you really don't want the partial content to be published to your users. We wouldn't want that empty video node going out to your users. So the first thing that you need to do to get it published to your site is to go through these installation docs and add a script tag to your page and tell Candu where the content should publish. The second thing you need to do is actually go through this publishing flow. We recommend you preview before you publish, but you can publish directly. I'm going to publish to the ether because this hasn't been installed anywhere, but you have to hit publish before any changes ever go out. So if we publish this card and then made a bunch of changes to it, those changes wouldn't automatically get pushed to our customers as soon as we were making them. We need to go through the process of hitting that publish button again. So the content is really just in demo form until you hit that publish button. And again, until you've actually installed it on your application. Until then, it's really just like a fun sandbox to play with. And like I said at the top, preview doesn't show to any of your customers. So you can preview as much content as you want in your app, and it won't fundamentally change your UI until you actually are publishing the content. Do you have content versioning? Yes. If you make mistakes that you don't love, it's easy to do things here that you're not quite sure about, or add something that you're not a huge fan of, or have someone on your team do that for you. There's a couple of different options. The first and really simple one is we have an undo and redo button. You can also use your quick keys for that. On a larger scale, if someone's made big changes and you are not a huge fan of them, you can always go to history, and we keep a full content history log of changes that have been made. So you can go back and revert to a previous version. Another thing I often recommend doing, especially if you're about to try and make big changes to content that you've published, is to use this clone content button. So you can have a second version of it that isn't published anywhere. And you can always sort of save your original version and then have sort of a sandbox that you can play around with a little bit more while still having that original to go back. Any other questions that we can cover? Obviously, please feel free. We have the intercom chat open, and you can email us anytime. My email, I'll type in right here, is georgia@candu.ai. So please, if you have questions about how to get things started, ping me anytime. Oh, great. A final question. What does the analytics section provide? Because we haven't published content, you won't be able to see our analytics in here, but I can give you a quick overview of what would be in here. We track total visits over time. So every person who's seen the page that Candu is installed on will get tracked, and we'll also track unique visitors over time. So every different individual who's coming to the page. Any interactive element that you add, so a button or a card click or link clicks, things like that, will be added with event tags here. So you can track how many people are clicking on the interactive elements you've added. And if you added something that's more progressive, like a checklist, where you want to see how people are moving through it, if you add the checklist content, you'll get another tab in the analytics section that will tell you how many people are making their way through your checklist and what steps are getting checked off the most. So one last thing, if you were to add a button, you can add the link here, or you can add an email or a guide. And if you go into this interactions tab that pops up, you can add an interaction label. So if you want to make sure this button is the get in touch button, you can track that through analytics. You can also push our analytics into Segment if you want to combine them with other sources that you're using. I really appreciate you coming. Have a great time with Candu, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.